place that God calls you is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. That was a quote from Frederick Buechner that he talked about last week. Last week we had the story of the calling of the prophet Jeremiah. The story where the word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah to call him to be a prophet. And Jeremiah steps back and said, "I'm just a boy. I don't even know how to speak." And the Lord says, "But you've been made for this. Because before you were born, I knew you. I formed you in the womb. I knit you together. And you were made for this." So then the Lord touched Jeremiah's lips, signifying that he had placed the word of the Lord in his mouth, and that he, Jeremiah, would be a mouthpiece for God. We talked about the fact that when God calls us to do small things or big things, they may be things different than what we're used to, but they're still connected to how God has made us, to who we are. Jeremiah had never been a prophet, and yet the gift resided within him, and God was activating it. And I mention this because, as I said, one of the ways to discern where God is leading us in life is to look at our lives. One of the questions we can ask is, where do we find joy in life? Where do we find delight? Where do we get energy? Because those things tell us, give us clues as to how God has actually made us. And if joy is not something predominant in your life at the moment, think of other times in your life where you have experienced joy and delight, or where you've gotten energy out of something. Because again, that is a clue to how God has shaped and formed you. A clue as to how and where God might be calling you. As Buechner says, the place that God calls you is the place where you most need to be, and where the world most needs you to be. Where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And I want us to keep this in mind, because today we not only have one story of calling, we have three. Every single reading, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Gospel, all have to do with God calling people to do something. But there's something a little bit different about these stories than the one that we heard in Jeremiah. Take the story of Isaiah. It's in chapter 6 of the book of Isaiah. Isaiah has this vision where he is brought up into the heavenly throne room, where he sees the Lord in all of his glory, and it's this kind of bigger than life scene. The hem of the Lord's robe fills the whole temple. There is smoke and incense everywhere. And the seraphs, which are the burning ones, that's what the Hebrew means. The seraph is a burning one. These burning ones are flying around. And it's this glorious kind of ecstatic moment, except that that's not how Isaiah experiences it. He's in the presence of God, and yet the only thing he can think of, the only thing that is in his awareness, is his own guilt and shame. Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among the people of unclean lips, and yet my eyes have beheld the Holy One of Israel. He can't enjoy God's presence because his own shame, his own sense of shame is getting in the way. And so in an act of grace, one of the seraphs goes to the altar, pulls a live coal from the altar and places it on Isaiah's lips and says to him, "You're guilty. has departed. With his shame taken away, Isaiah can now step forward and say to the Lord of hosts, "Here am I, send me." And what exactly does God have Isaiah do? Speak the word of the Lord. His lips have been purified, and now he speaks the word of the Lord. And what I want you to see is that Isaiah's lips were for him instruments of shame. Woe is me, I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And yet the Lord transformed his lips to where Isaiah would be able to speak the word of the Lord. He takes the thing that had so embarrassed and shamed Isaiah, and it became his gift. Same thing happened with Paul. In our reading from 1 Corinthians, we're at the beginning of this very long discourse. In fact, I think we'll be with chapter 15 for the next 3 or 4 weeks. And it's all about Paul making an argument for the reality and the significance of Jesus' resurrection. And he starts out by saying, listen, what I handed on to you is simply what I received. That Christ died in accordance with the Scriptures, he was buried, and he was raised from the dead, also in accordance with the Scriptures. And he appeared to Peter, he appeared to the 12, he appeared to 500 at one time, he appeared to his own brother James and to the other apostles, and then he appeared to one who was the last and the least of all of them. He appeared to me. And I'm not even worthy to be called an apostle because I actively persecuted the church. I sought out those who were the followers of Jesus, and I persecuted them. And yet, by the grace of God, I am what I am. When Paul was on the road to Damascus, in hot pursuit of Christians, wanting to put them in prison, Jesus met him. And one of the things that Jesus did not do was take away Paul's zeal. Which is interesting, because it was Paul's zeal for the law, Paul's zeal for the traditions of the Jews, Paul's zeal for the honor and glory of God that was causing him, that was leading him to persecute Christians. Yet Jesus didn't take his zeal away. He transformed it. He baptized it. It became the gift that Paul would use to follow Jesus. At one point, he was zealous in persecuting Christians, and then he became a zealous Christian. And in his zeal, he himself became persecuted. So this thing that Paul, in a sense, was ashamed of, that led him to oppose God, is what God ends up using for his glory. And then we come to the gospel. It's an interesting gospel story. And interesting in one way because Luke has this habit of rearranging the material that he got from Matthew, or that he got from Mark. Mark narrates the story of the calling of the first disciples at the very beginning. Jesus is coming, proclaiming the gospel. He's walking along the shores of the Sea of Galilee. He sees these 4 fishermen. He says, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of people." And so they drop their nets, they leave their boats, and they follow him. It takes about 4 verses to call 4 people. But the story we have today, which really is the same story, has lots of different details, and it's much longer. Jesus has been teaching the crowds. The crowds are so numerous, and they've gathered along the shore, that he gets into Simon Peter's boat so that he can teach the crowds from the sea. And then after he's done teaching, he looks at Peter and says, let's push out further into the deep and let your nets down. Peter says, Master, we have been fishing all night. Haven't caught a single thing. But because you have asked me, I'll do this thing. And he goes out, lets his nets down, cannot pull them in because there are too many fish. We must call to other boats who help them gather in this collection of fish. Here's the interesting bit. Notice Peter's reaction. Jesus, get away from me, for I am a sinful man. It's the same thing that Isaiah experienced in the presence of God. Peter, seeing this abundance that really revealed the divine nature of who Jesus was, in the presence of Jesus, he can only be aware of his own sense of guilt, his own sense of shame. And Jesus very gently looks at him and says, don't be afraid. Because from now on, you will be catching people. Now, I don't know if Peter was ashamed of his livelihood as a fisher. It was not considered one of the lines of one of the occupations that you would want to go into. In fact, the fact that Peter and some of the other disciples are fishermen probably means that somewhere down the line, their family lost their ancestral land. So they're not tied to the land, they're tied to the sea. And they don't own it. They have to rent. They have to buy the rights to be able to fish and to sell. But what is interesting is that when Jesus takes these fishermen and invites them to follow him, he embeds their future. He embeds what he's going to have them do in what they already are. You fish for fish. Now you're going to fish for people. When God calls us to do things, he embeds that call in what he has already created us to be. Sometimes he embeds that call not in our strengths, but in our weaknesses. Sometimes he embeds that call not in what we're proud of, but in what we're ashamed of. So I might modify Buechner's quote a little bit, or at least add to it. I think it's true that the places that God calls us are the places where our deep joy meets the world's deep hunger. But I also think this is true, that the places that God calls us is where our deep hunger and the world's deep hunger meet. Where our deep needs meets the world's deep needs. And that sometimes what we have to give God in order to follow Jesus are not our strengths, but our weaknesses. The things that embarrass us. The things that we would prefer to hide. But God is asking for us to give him everything. And so Peter and James and John, you know what they leave behind? Everything they're good at. Everything that they use to make a life for themselves. The boats, the nets. And they follow Jesus. We provide the weakness. God provides the strength. That's not easy to do.